Hi, everybody. I'm Jocelyn Cook, and I'm here to introduce one of your plenary speakers today, Dan Dubrovski. Hi, Dan. Good to see you. Good to see everybody else, too. So I was asked to do a video introduction of Dan, which I am not very good at doing. And also I have COVID hair, but that's what happens in these times. Anyway, I was actually excited to introduce Dan. I've known him for a really long time, since he worked in the US for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration at the FASD Center of Excellence, and I'm pretty sure that's when we met, probably around 20 years ago, when I was on a bunch of committees that SAMHSA had at the time. And Dan and I started to chat and be friends, and have spent the last probably 20 years back and forth working together. Dan's made an incredible impression on the field of FASD. I had the pleasure of listening to him speak with his son Bill, who's been his inspiration and the inspiration for a lot of the work that many folks in the field have done. And so I think that Dan's contributions have been amazing. He's a great guy, has a great sense of humor. He gives great presents for any of you on his gift list. According to his biography, I could tell you all kinds of fun stories, but I'm supposed to read the biography, so I'll do that. Dan's worked over 40 years in the field of behavioral health. He's done a lot, as I said. He's had a little more time than me to make a good impression in the field because he's older than me, just pointing that out. But he's had a long career in helping care for individuals, helping care for families, a child care worker in residential treatment. He's been a therapist in inpatient, outpatient, and a number of community settings. And Dan's been a really strong, internationally recognized, well-known trainer in the field of FASD and presented all over the world. He's really helped to develop some screening tools for FASD, which have been published in the literature and many of us are using in our programs and our research today. He's also worked, I guess, in pretty much every sector that is known, on every symptom and issue that seems to be known related to stress and team building and transition and burnout and caregiver support and health. He's facilitated groups for non-offending caregivers of children who've been sexually abused. And as I said, he was part of the SAMHSA's FASD Center of Excellence for 14 years. So right now, Dan's a consultant. So I'm sure he'd love to hear from some of you. And he provides training, technical assistance to agencies, communities, pretty much the gamut, provinces, territories, individuals and groups, really focus on improving outcomes for individuals and families, service providers, and making those linkages to improve experiences and outcomes. And as I said, Dan's been inspired in this field really through the experiences he had with his amazing son, Bill. And I used to love to hear the stories that he would tell about Bill and their adventures. And I'm just really thankful for the work that Dan has done, and I'm thankful to still be a part of the work in the FASD field. So have a great conference. Have a great time listening to Dan, and Dan, we'll catch up soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you very much, Jocelyn. It's good to see you again, at least virtually. Jocelyn said that I've been in the field for 40 years, but what she neglected to say was that I started when I was 5 years old. So she keeps on saying that I'm older than her. I'm not so sure about that. But I really, I appreciate that very warm introduction. As Jocelyn said, she and I have worked together for a long time in FASD, in the research end of it, and in the service end of it. So I really respect all of the work that she has done and really appreciate her having introduced me. And definitely when COVID is under control, we will catch up. So I'm really excited to be able to talk with you. I wish it was in person, but this is what we have right now about addressing some of the challenging behaviors in FASD. And it's been a very exciting symposium, and I hope you've all enjoyed it so far. And at the end of this presentation, we will have some time for questions and answers. I am, as Jocelyn said, an independent consultant at this point. So if anyone wants to contact me, email is the best way. And my email address is ddubovksy. It's the reverse of the S and the K in my name, at verizon.net. And that's the best way to get in touch with me. And I always appreciate hearing from people and providing whatever help I can. Again, as Jocelyn said, this is Bill. He has been my mentor in understanding FASD over the years. He's the one who got me involved in this field. And really it was because when he was about 7 years old, I brought him to a neurologist to try to find out why he was having some of the problems he was having. He wasn't doing well in school. He wasn't doing well in the neighborhood. And the clincher for me was that he wasn't responding to my amazing parenting techniques. So I figured there had to be something wrong with him. It couldn't possibly be me. And the neurologist did a cursory neurological exam and she said, "Does he drink?" And I said, "No, I don't think so. I hope not. He's only 7. Why would you ask me if he drinks?" And she said, "Well, his reflexes are uneven, and usually that's indicative of drug or alcohol use in an individual or in their parents." And that was 1982, and there was very little I could find out about this. And for the next 7 years, we really struggled until The Broken Cord was published in 1989 by Michael Doris, and it was the first popular book on FAS. And lots of people have read the book and said it's really depressing because Michael only talked about all the problems with his son. And I found it incredibly validating because everything he talked about in terms of things that his son did, I said, "Oh, that's Bill. Oh, that sounds just like Bill." And all of his behaviors that for so long had been labeled as willful, purposeful, non-compliant, uncooperative behaviors were really began to make sense. And it was still 4 more years before I could get a diagnosis for him. So he was diagnosed with FAS when he was 19 years old, which meant 19 years of failing in every system of care and 19 years of my providing the wrong parenting approach to him. So I am from the do as I say, not as I did school of thought, because I did lots and lots of things wrong. But what he taught me was to think differently about behaviors. And to ask what's causing a behavior, which is probably the most important question for anybody to ask with any behavior before deciding how to respond to that behavior. And he also taught me how painful it is to live with a hidden disability that nobody recognizes, to be told over and over again, you can do it if you want, you're just not trying hard enough. And he really tried and he couldn't do it on his own. And it is so painful to live with that kind of hidden disability. And one of the ways that a lot of people deal with that kind of ongoing emotional pain is to use substances. So I understand why we will see a significant portion of people with FASD in having substance use issues. It's not a great long-term treatment, but I understand why people do it, because at least for the moment, it blocks some of that pain. And it really is so tough to live with this disability that nobody recognizes. So I really thank Bill. He taught me an incredible amount. This is just what I'm hoping that I'll cover this afternoon. So these are overall some of the challenging issues that lots of people with FASD and their families really struggle with. Aggression. And again, for each of these issues, the question we need to ask is, what's causing this? What's causing the aggression? What's causing this behavior that looks oppositional? So many people who I have met over the years with FASD, including Bill, have been diagnosed with an oppositional disorder because their behavior looks so oppositional. But in actuality, most of that quote, oppositional behavior is because we've given them multiple verbal directions and they don't remember what they need to do because of damage in the brain, in their working memory in the brain. So again, what looks oppositional often is not truly oppositional. So the response for oppositional behavior is not going to be helpful. Again, acting out behavior, why the acting out? I often talk about the fact that you have somebody, let's say you have a youth who's been in 4 or 5 foster homes, moved from place to place to place, and begins to act out when it's time to go to school in the morning. Maybe that youth is really terrified that if he or she goes off to school, they might not have a home to come back to because that's been their experience. Or in terms of sexual issues and sexuality and sexual abuse, either as the person who has been abused or a perpetrator of abuse. It's like, or the person who acts out when it's time to go to bed at night because they have been sexually abused, and often that happens at nighttime and they're afraid to go to bed. So we always have to ask what's causing these behaviors and not just assume that they are all willful, purposeful behaviors. They are often seen as being non-compliant, which is a term that I hate. Because they don't do what they're told to do, or that they're not motivated, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then another challenging issue, of course, in the last year has been the coronavirus, because now people are stuck at home and they're not able to go out, and families don't get a break, which increases the risk for more possibilities of abuse, because these individuals are underfoot all the time and having more problems, and the family doesn't get a break and the individual doesn't get a break and isn't able to go out and relieve some of that stress and anxiety that they feel. So there's a tremendous amount in terms of the coronavirus that's really challenging these times. And we need to think about, okay, how do we do that? One of the things I talk about in terms of that is the essential importance of carving out some time during the day for each person to have time by themselves to do something fun and to do things fun together, which you'll see. I'll talk more about. And then there's also an increase in caregiver fatigue because, again, the family is so together all the time, and there aren't these breaks for just relaxation. So all of these issues cause difficulties in lots of different areas, and we'll talk about some of them. The first thing I think is really important that I often see is missed in FASD is thinking about what part of their behavior is part of normal development. And normal development may not be where they are chronologically, but where they are developmentally, and what's happened to them in the past might affect that. So for example, if you have a 15-year-old who is arguing with their parents, arguing about different things, we can't always say, uh-oh, this is bad behavior that we have to stop right away and we have to consequence them for it. Because basically that's part of an adolescent's job description, is fight against authority and fight for individuation and for independence. That's part of an adolescent's job. That's part of adolescent development. And adolescents need something to fight against. So let's give them something safe to fight against so they don't escalate to something dangerous to fight against. Because if we don't give them something safe to fight against and argue about, then it will escalate. So it's, again, recognizing, oh yeah, well, this is part of normal development. This isn't part of a behavior that is a negative behavior that we have to squelch. Thinking about things like, for very young children, a 2-year-old who is in daycare and grabs a toy from another kid and hits him over the head with it. I'll tell you that that's part of normal child development at 2 years old. That physical aggression is part of normal child development until about 2.5 years old. So the problem is 20 years ago, most of these kids were home. If they grabbed a toy from their sibling and hit them over the head with it, it was dealt with in the home. It was no big deal. But now that they're in daycare, they grab a toy from another kid, hit them over the head with it. All of a sudden, they're identified as an aggressive child. Maybe they need medication, they need treatment. Not necessarily. If they are aggressive if they are doing that at 5 years old and they are developmentally 5, then that becomes an issue, but not at 2.5, not at 2 years old. So again, it's knowing normal child and adolescent development is really important. At one point, I was consulting with an agency that was working with a man in his early 30s. And this was a case management agency in the States, and I live in the States. I have to apologize for that right up front. I should have done that right up front. This young man, every time he used to get into some minor difficulties with the law, he would go before a judge, and the judge would order him to have case management services. And the case management agency would provide a case manager for him, and a day or two later, he would fire his case manager. And then a day or two later, he would call up the case management agency and say, I need a case manager. And they would provide another case manager for him, and a day or two later, he would fire that case manager. And the agency was fed up with this man and wanted us to tell them that it was okay to tell the judge that this man was not appropriate for case management services. And I said to them, tell me a little bit about his early life. And they said, we don't know anything. I said, well, tell me what you do know. They actually knew a lot. That when he was 12 years old, his mother died. His father tried to raise him on his own for a few months, couldn't raise him, sent him to a relative. He was with the relative for a few months and then went into foster care, was in 4 or 5 foster homes till he was 18 years old, and then off on his own without any ability to take care of himself. So what felt like annoying, oppositional, resistant, non-compliant behavior for a 33-year-old was very appropriate early adolescent behavior. Come here, go away. I love you, I hate you. I need you, I don't want you. And because we knew, I said in his early adolescence, his development was really interrupted in some ways because of his mother's death and all of these moves. So yes, you need to provide case management, but you need to help him work through those adolescent issues. And the people adolescents are most angry with typically are those they are most dependent on because they don't want to be dependent. So for families to just recognize that, be able to take a step back and take a breath, I think is really important. So we know, you all know this. These are the things that I see over and over again in people with FASD, and they get them into trouble. Being very friendly and very talkative and interrupting all the time. And then they appear to be rude and intrusive. They really want to be liked and they really want to be helpful. But they are so naive and gullible that they believe anything anyone tells them. In order to be our friend, you have to go rob that store or beat that person up. Don't worry. We all had to do that. You won't get into trouble. Okay. So again, the being very friendly, overly friendly and talkative, they often will get rejected by peers because they're overly friendly and they're talking all the time and they're interrupting, not because they want to be rude, but because whatever they're thinking comes out of their mouth. So I was doing a presentation at a conference at one point, and Bill walked into the room, walked up to me in the middle of my speech and started talking to me. And it appeared from others that he was being rude and intrusive. But what it was, I need to talk to my dad. There he is. It wasn't there he is. He's busy. I don't care, which is what it looks like and feels like to people because his thinking didn't go that far. Oh, I need to tell my dad something. There he is, period. So not at all rude and intrusive. But again, gets them into trouble, gets them rejected by a number of people. One day they get it. they follow the rules, they do what they're supposed to, the next day they don't, and then everybody thinks that not doing what they're supposed to is willful and purposeful. But that is very typical in FASD. And in some ways, they are much older than their chronological age, and in some ways, more childlike. And that's also really typical. But we respond often, well, if they can act this way here, they can act this way everywhere. Not necessarily. And to remember that all of this is due to how the brain is working. That FASD is a brain-based disorder, and that the behaviors that we typically see are due to how the brain is functioning. And that how the brain is functioning has nothing to do with how bright somebody is. Because we've identified people who have a genius level of IQ, who still have FASD, still can't follow 3 directions at once, still can't read social cues, still are very friendly and talkative and interrupting all the time and naive and gullible. So it has nothing to do with intelligence, but understanding the brain is so important in helping us know how we can help people with FASD. Tremendous difficulty recognizing dangerous people and dangerous situations because of damage in the structure of the brain called the amygdala, which is responsible for recognizing danger and fear. And the problem there is that often we will say, well, you get beaten up by that person, you'll know not to go back to them. May work for some people, doesn't work for most people with FASD because they don't recognize the danger. As they get older, they're often repeatedly in domestic violence situations because they don't recognize the danger of the situation. The difficulty following multiple directions and rules is really because of damage in working memory, which is again in a certain part of the brain. And if your working memory is damaged, then when you are given multiple directions, like I would say to Bill, go to your room, pick up your dirty clothes, put them in the hamper, fold your clean clothes and put them away when he was like 15 years old. And I would go to his room a half hour later, he was playing, the room was a mess. And I would say, why didn't you do what I told you? He would say, I didn't feel like it. You're grounded. And I would ground him for a week at a time. And at 27 years old, he was still grounded for another 25 years. Remember, do as I say, not as I did. But I asked him the wrong question. And when I finally realized I was missing something and I asked him the right question, which was, Bill, what did I tell you to do? He would say things like mop the floor, vacuum the rugs, because by the time he got to his room, he didn't know what to do next. Because if working memory is impaired and you've given them 3 instructions, they'll set out to do one of them. And by the time they get there, they have no idea what they're supposed to do. They'll guess at it. They'll often get it wrong, and it will look like oppositional behavior. That's due to damage in working memory. That's not willful, purposeful behavior. And remember that question, what's causing the behavior? That not following multiple directions or multiple instructions is not willful behavior. It's caused by how the brain is functioning. The other thing I've learned from people with FASD over the years is that the best way to help them is by modeling the behavior. They model the behavior of those around them. If they get rejected by pro-social peers and end up gravitating to the gangs and the negative peers, they'll model that behavior. We need to connect them with real positive role models so they can model more positive behavior. They don't tend to learn most by being told what to do, by being shown what to do, or by consequence for not doing it, but by modeling. And then again, across how bright no matter how bright they are, they tend to be very literal in their thinking because the part of the brain that's responsible for abstract thinking is also often really, really impaired. So that literal thinking means that they don't get, they don't get things like metaphors and similes and abstract expressions and proverbs and idioms. They don't really understand those, and they take things very, very literally. Like if you say, hold your breath, you better also say breathe. Very, very literal. So again, if you're literal in your thinking, and again, this is damage in the frontal lobes of the brain, you do what you're told, but you do exactly what you are told. If you say to somebody with FASD, you're fed up with them and you say, go take a hike, Don't be surprised if they disappear for 8 hours and you've called the police and then they come back and you say, where have you? Well, you told me to take a hike. If you're literal in your thinking, you also can't predict the consequences of your actions. Oh, if I do this, this might happen. This is why reward and consequence systems don't work for them, but also why they are often in trouble with the law for the same thing over and over again, or they get in trouble or they get consequence for the same thing over and over and over again. And if somebody is being consequenced for the same behavior over and over again, then maybe they're not getting it. It's not like they're thinking, oh, like others can, oh, last time I did this, I got in trouble. If I do it again, I might get in trouble again. Again, some people that works with, but not most people with FASD. Also, the sense of time and space are both abstract concepts. So the sense of historical time and future time is an abstract concept. Well, the basis of reward and consequence systems is if you want to do this later, you need to do this now, or you cannot go out and play now because this happened before. If you don't get that sense of time, you don't understand why you can't go out. The only possibilities are either the person is mean or you're bad. And we do that a lot, and we reinforce this kinds of image and this they develop this self-esteem or self-image that they're just bad because don't understand why they're not getting the rewards. The other thing with the sense of time is often you set an appointment for somebody with FASD and they show up an hour late repeatedly, and then you find out, or a day late, and then you find out that actually they left their home at their appointment time. Because the idea that, oh, it takes me an hour to get there, I need to leave an hour before my appointment to get there. Which means that if they have technology like a cell phone or an iPad or an iPod or an iWatch or whatever, let's set, reminders in the cell phone about when they have to leave for their appointment, not when their appointment time is. And then space is another abstract concept. So often they are standing way too close to people when they're talking with them. And then people get offended by that and don't want to be near them. But again, how far you stand from somebody when you talk with them, if that's a problem. And it's not a problem for everybody. Remember, FASD is a spectrum of issues. So not everybody has the same issues to the same degree, but these are really pretty common. We need to role play how far you stand from somebody when you talk with them. That's the best way to teach them how far you stand from somebody when you talk with them. And what do you tell somebody the first time you meet them? Do you tell them your whole history and where you live and when nobody's going to be home and where the money is hidden in the house? Probably not. Money is another abstract concept. So often, like with Bill, if he had $1, $10, $100, or $1,000, it would be gone within a day or two. Because the idea of I have my money now, but I have to save it to pay my rent next week, or I have to save it for this at the end of the week or next month, or 2 weeks later, I have to save it for food. They don't get that. I have it, I can spend it. That's damage in abstract thinking. So the idea, we often will use what we call natural consequences. You spend your money, you don't have money to pay your rent, you'll get evicted, then you will learn to save your money and pay your rent. That works with some people, doesn't work with most people with FASD because of this damage in abstract thinking. So we need a different approach, recognizing that that's what's going on. It's not willful, purposeful behavior. It feels that way. Well, they're spending all their money. Then they will learn, then they won't have money for what they want, and then they'll learn to save their money for what they want later on. That only works if you have this sense of time, historical time and future time. And I talked about the difficulty with sarcasm and similes and metaphors. There's also difficulty in understanding joking. And most of the people I know with FASD have a great sense of humor, can be really funny. I love being around them, but they absolutely can't tell if somebody's joking with them or if somebody is serious. And if somebody's joking with them, they'll laugh along with them and then often think that the person hates them or is making fun of them or is out to get them. Because laughter is controlled in one area of the brain, but joking, processing humor is controlled in the frontal lobes of the brain that are damaged by alcohol. That means that when you joke with somebody with FASD who has this problem, you say, I'm just joking with you. don't take it seriously. I could always tell when Bill didn't get a joke, and I would say, Bill, they're just joking with you. Don't take it seriously. And he would say, oh, they are, Dad? Okay. And then he was fine. But he couldn't pick up the nuances to figure out, is this person joking or not? So I had to teach him that if I wasn't around, and he needed to ask people, are you joking with me? That's all he needed to do. And his fourth grade teacher, years after he got his diagnosis of FASD, said, thinking back, another kid in the class would tell a joke, Bill would laugh along with the rest of the class and then turn to me and say, I don't get it. What's so funny? That was a red flag we totally missed. And then there were issues around sexuality, social media, suicide, involvement with the law, and sleep disturbances that I'm going to talk a bit about. So in terms of sexuality, there are certainly risks around sex trafficking, because again, if you are naive and gullible and believe anything anyone tells you, then you are at higher risk. If you have been sexually abused and you feel that that's the only way you can get noticed in a positive way by other people or paid attention to by other people, then you may use that sexuality as your method of being liked or having friends, because remember, there's that strong desire to be liked and to be helpful. Then there's risk of pregnancy, because the idea of using safe sex techniques is really difficult to get across. So recognizing if this is a person who has these really highly sexualized behaviors, think about are there early life experiences that have kind of led to this, have been early abuses or early experiences or remember, they learn by modeling. So early experiences in their home around this. Remember, what's causing the behavior is so important in terms of how do we approach it. And then I think and we don't talk a lot about sexuality. We don't like talking about that. I really didn't want to talk with Bill about sex until he was about 35 years old. But that didn't work. And then I think that because I think that people with FASD are at high risk for HIV and for sexually transmitted infections, because again, if you can't avoid dangerous people in dangerous situations, if you really want to be liked, and if you are very friendly, so you meet your new boyfriend or girlfriend at the bus stop who says, I won't be your boyfriend or girlfriend if you don't have sex with me. Okay. And then even if we have taught safe sex techniques, which we have to start early, we have to start talking about sexuality early. We can't wait until college or even high school. And the idea, even if we teach safe sex techniques, and I worked in HIV and AIDS for about 5 years, did a lot of safe sex training. The idea of remembering to use safe sex when you need it, safe sex techniques, or negotiating safe sex is very different than knowing safe sex. How do you negotiate it if your boyfriend or girlfriend says, I won't be your boyfriend or girlfriend if you make me use a condom, forget it. Oh yeah, okay, no problem. Negotiating safe sex is very different than knowing safe sex techniques. And I'll talk a little bit more about, how do we, what do we do about, how do we address these things? I think there's tremendous risk around social media for the same reasons. Very naive and gullible, believe anything anyone writes on social media. I'm a 12-year-old boy, will you send nude pictures of yourself to me? And it's really a 40-year-old man. That happens all the time. And then they start chatting with them over the phone, pretending to be somebody they are not, the other person, and then want to arrange a meeting, maybe in a dark alley somewhere or a dark street or late at night, just sneak out of the house and do this. And then, the risks are high for abuse, for death. And, so that's really important, because again, they can't figure out, is this person really who they say they are or not? And then the person says, like this happened where I live in Pennsylvania in the States, where a man posed as an 11 or 12-year-old boy, convinced this girl to send him nude pictures on Snapchat, because he said, when you send things on Snapchat, they disappear within 3 or 4 seconds. Nobody can get a hold of them, which is not true. And so he got these pictures and he sent them to everybody in her middle school. Luckily, he was caught and put in jail. But again, it's that belief that if I send a picture, if I put a picture up, nobody else is going to use it or be able to get it. What to share and what not to share, what to put on social media and what not about yourself. And again, not recognizing dangerous people in dangerous situations. So all of those are risks with social media. In terms of suicide, the other thing we don't like talking about sex and death. Is that we don't like talking about death. So let's say there's been a suicide or even another kind of death, and we talk about, oh, at least the person's at peace now. And here's this person with FASD thinking, well, I want to be at peace. So then if I kill myself, then I'll be at peace. Or if I'm dead, then I'll be at peace. Or she's with God. Well, hell, I want to be with God. So if I kill myself, then I'll be with God. We don't talk about people as having died. We talk about people as having passed away or people being lost. We need to be more direct in talking about death. The other thing is, I know that when there are communities where there's a rash of suicides, I know that some of those are people with FASD, because they'll think things like, they'll see everybody really upset. So if I kill myself, then I'll know that people care about me because I'll see how upset they are. Or I'll get back at my parents. They'll treat me better if I kill myself, because then they'll be sorry and they'll treat me better, because they don't think through remember, they don't think through to the end result, to the consequence of being dead and not being here anymore. And we don't like talking about that. And then there are these things that lead them into interactions with the law. And it's the same thing we talked about already. Naivete and gullibility. They're very literal in their thinking. They want to be liked, so they'll help somebody out and get into trouble. The first time Bill got into trouble with the law, he was shoplifting a telephone cord for a friend of his who said, I need that telephone cord. Bill, will you go into the store and take it for me? Don't worry, you won't get into trouble. Again, the difficulty with verbal receptive language, and most of what we do is verbal receptive. In other words, talking with people and expecting them to take the information into their brain, store it properly, and recall it when they need it. That's where they have trouble. I talked about difficulty with abstract thinking and difficulty recognizing danger. They are in court. The judge is talking to them about what they've done, and they are smiling, they are laughing, they are waving at their friends, and judges think that they have no conscience and no remorse. I hear this a lot in FASD. Most of the time, I don't believe that that's the case. There is a disconnect between what they are feeling and how that feeling is expressed facially and verbally, which seems to be due to damage in one of the structures of the brain that's affected by prenatal alcohol exposure. So we need to practice modeling the range of putting words and facial expressions to the entire range of feelings, and teaching them to put words and facial expressions to the range of feelings. Because often Bill used to have a facial expression that looked like he was going to attack somebody. And I realized he had that facial expression whether he was happy, sad, anxious, angry. But people don't react to what people are feeling. They react to what they see in the facial expressions and the words. So we need to work with them around that. Again, their impairment in working memory means that they don't remember exactly what happened. So they may say, well, this happened a long time ago when it really happened very recently, or this just happened and it happened a long time ago. So in the law, people think that they are making up stories. They are lying. They are covering up. And that might not be the case at all. It might be this damage in working memory. The other thing is that they don't want to come across as not understanding what's going on. as they get older. And I've worked with lots of adolescents in different settings, and they've told me it's better to be seen as bad than to be seen as stupid. And those are the words that they use. And if you say, I'm not following what you're talking about, I don't get it, then they, in their mind, they appear, quote, stupid. And those are the words that they've used. And I understand that. If you're sitting in a high school class and you don't understand the teacher, act out. Nobody will ask you whether you understand the teacher. We'll deal with the acting out behavior. And again, better to be seen as bad than to be seen in their eyes as stupid, or in anyone else's eyes. So they don't want to appear that they don't understand. So they're going to say, yeah, I understand. Yep, I know what I need to do. And they don't have a clue. And then there are striking sleep disturbances. The latest research is showing that anywhere between 50 and 80%, 50 and 86% of those with FASD have significant sleep disturbances. They don't get to sleep and they don't stay asleep. Then they're anxious about going to sleep, and they are kind of, acting out around bedtime, or they're doing other things to delay going to bed because they know that they're going to have trouble falling asleep and staying asleep. They may have bedwetting. They may have nightmares. And then once they're up in the morning, they are up and going, which is very different than those with ADHD, who sometimes can't get going until they have their morning medication. And then they're finding some sleep apnea in those with FASD, and also melatonin, which helps people get to sleep, not stay asleep, but get to sleep. That we have melatonin in our bodies, but that there seems to be some difficulty in the secretion of melatonin in FASD, which may increase that difficulty in getting to sleep. So, and I'm trying to be very cognizant of time. One of the things that we have a problem with is that we think that we need to find what motivates this person and use it as a reward for good behavior and take it away for bad behavior. So we find what they like to do. They like to play video games. Okay, if you get your homework done, you can play your video games for half an hour. Or no, you can't play your video games today because you didn't finish your homework, or you got in trouble in school, or whatever it is. And that if they're really motivated, then they will do it. That doesn't work with most people with FASD. And all it does is reinforce that they must just be bad. So Bill, at one point when he got to middle school, he was having trouble bringing his homework assignments home. At the same time, he was going to karate classes, and he could go to karate every night. And I said to him, Bill, every day you bring your homework home, you get to go to karate that night. And from that day forward, he never brought his homework home and never went to karate again. That was a mistake. He should have gone to karate every night, because that was really good for him, no matter what happened in school, whether he brought his homework home or not. But again, this is before he got his diagnosis of FAS, and this is when he had a diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder, ADHD, and reactive attachment disorder. So everybody, all the professionals were saying, you have to set limits and consequences. And obviously he's not really motivated to go to karate, and that was not the case at all. And I was just setting him up to fail. The other thing is, we are so focused, as it says here, we're a problem-based society. So we constantly are focused on negative behaviors. We have to stop these negative behaviors. So lots of our meetings and our policies and our rules are all focused on stopping negative behaviors. And I really believe we need to stop doing that. We need to change our approach. One of the things that I have found is that people with FASD often have heard over and over and over again what they do wrong, and have rarely heard what they do right. And I was doing some consulting for two young women in their late 20s who both had FASD, and this is a treatment program, and it was a clinical staff meeting, and they wanted some ideas for how to work with them. And they brought each of them up individually, introduced them to me. And the first question I asked them was, what do you do well? And neither one of them could answer that question. If I had asked them what they do wrong, they could recite it in a minute. But that speaks to how focused we are on the negatives. So I think we have to shift to what I call a positive focus system of care, which means really identify strengths and abilities and focus on building those strengths and abilities. What do they do well? And let's build on that and not use it as a reward for good behavior and take it away for bad behavior. We need to consistently tell the person what they're doing right. And I say to families and I say to professionals, whoever is working with this individual or living with this individual, I want you to start out, we'll start out slow. Every day, I want you to tell this person 5 times a day what they've done right and what they've done well, and write down what you've told them. Because when things go wrong, you're going to forget all of those. Every day you need to do that. Not just once, but every day. Let's start telling them what they're doing right. And it doesn't mean we ignore challenging behaviors, but our focus is on building on the strengths and abilities. I did a training at an agency, and there was a staff member who had a 14-year-old with FASD who had lots of difficulties and was very angry all the time and wouldn't eat with the family and wouldn't acknowledge the family and was just always angry and aggressive. And his mother sent me an email the morning after the training and said, I just want to let you know, I went home after the training and I said to my son, I just want to thank you for all of the help you've been giving your younger brother the last few weeks. I really appreciate that. She said for the first time in months, he smiled. They had dinner together. They had a really fun evening together. Is that going to work every day? Probably not, but at least it did that day. And again, let's start telling them what they do right. And for some of them, if they're older, they won't trust that because they've never heard it before. That's why we need to be consistent in doing that. So I believe that everyone has strengths. As I said, some of them, sometimes they're the things that get them into difficulty, but we need to really build on that. So we need to talk about what are the strengths in the individual, what are the strengths in the family, what are the strengths in those service providers, and what are the strengths in the community. And if it's a community that has some cultural strengths, what I find often is that in maybe 50 or 75 or 100 years ago, if somebody was different in many of these communities, often they were just accepted as a member of the community. Often it was people who might be diagnosed by psychiatry as having schizophrenia, who were seen as the seers, the medicine people in the community, because they saw and heard things that others did not, and they valued that. But they were accepted as part of the community. As we become more westernized, I think we've lost that often. And if somebody is different, then they tend to be ostracized from the community. But if there is a community with a lot of cultural strengths, and this is a person who really likes art or drumming or singing or dancing, is there something they can do in the rituals and traditions of the community so they can feel part of the community and not apart from the community, as long as you don't set it up as a reward for good behavior and take it away for bad behavior. So these are the strengths that I see over and over again in people with FASD. Remember, everybody is different. Those first 4 are the ones that get them into trouble, but you have somebody who is really very friendly, really wants to be helpful, very verbal. They're in let's say they're in some kind of treatment program or school program. They could be the tour guide for visitors who come. They could help new people coming into the program feel comfortable. Let's use these as positives. If I said to Bill as a teenager, Bill, go out and mow the lawn or you will be grounded, 10 years later, he would still be grounded and the lawn wouldn't be mowed. But if I said to him, Bill, I need help mowing the lawn, would you mind helping me? In 5 minutes, he would be out mowing the lawn. Such an incredible strength of wanting to be helpful. Let's use that. Let's ask them to do something rather than tell them to do it. And you might get a totally different response. Many of them are good with little kids. The asterisk is because some of them have sexually inappropriate behavior, often because they're misreading cues, but many of them do not. They're often good with little kids, good with the elderly, good with people with physical disabilities, not good with their peers because their peers remind them that there's something different about them. And every day is a new day for them, which means that they don't hold a grudge. And they can be furious with you 1 minute and 10 minutes later, you're their best friend, which as an adult might get them a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, a misdiagnosis of borderline personality disorder. So these are some of Bill's strengths. Incredible with little kids. These are his cousins who could jump on him and hit him and pull his hair, and he would never, ever get angry. I talked about he loved karate. He was so excited when in a karate tournament he could break this board. I got him involved in swimming, which is a great exercise. And he was on a swim team for about 4 or 5 years, never accepted as an integral member of the team. But, you know, I always just focused on his improving his times. It didn't matter how he finished in a meet. It was just, let's look at your times and see if you can improve them. If he improved his time, Bill, that's great. If he didn't improve his time, it was like, Bill, you came close. You'll try again next time. And it wasn't like, if you beat your time, you get this reward. Every once in a while, I say, Bill, you tried really hard today. Let's go out and have some ice cream, whatever it was. He was in an overnight camp when he was 12, and this other kid in his bunk who he connected with was a young man with a severe hearing disability. So he really connected with this other youngster with a disability who Bill felt kind of, you know, simpatico with. And they got along, and they were friends for years afterwards. He decided at one point that he wanted to learn Chinese, and I thought, oh God, he has trouble with English, Chinese of all languages. But he was determined, and the reason I'm bringing that up is because never say, oh, forget it, you can't possibly do this or anything like it. Try something else. Because he learned a little bit of Mandarin. He listened to these tapes over and over and over again, and he learned a little bit of Mandarin. So, you know, he was able to do that. I'm going to skip this because we have to get to strategies, and I don't have a lot of time. So again, the overall in this is to remember that FASD is brain-based, so that the behaviors we typically see are most often due to how the brain is functioning, not purposeful, willful behaviors, and that people will tell you, no, they know what they're doing, they need to be consequence for it, that's how they'll learn. No, that's not how people with FASD learn. They don't learn by experiencing consequences. So what we need to do is look at how can we modify the environment, not change the person. How do we modify this person's environment, those around them, and how those around them respond to them, so that they can then change their behavior or modify their behavior, rather than, no, they have to change what they do. We have to reduce the stimuli in their environment. Less is really better. Things like the sensory issues, so softer lighting, not bright lights, softer colors, not bright colors. Be aware of things like tags in clothing. Bill used to rip all of his shirts, and it was seen as destructive behavior, so I had to consequence him for it, until I realized that it was the tags that were sewn on the inside of the shirt that he couldn't stand. So he would rip out the tags, and because they're always sewn in seams, he would rip the shirts. So once I cut all the tags out of his shirts, he didn't rip another shirt. This was not destructive behavior. This was a sensory issue. They're often seen as very picky eaters, but it's not that they are just picky eaters. It really is the temperatures, the textures, the tastes of certain foods that they can't tolerate, certain smells they can't tolerate. These are all because they're hypersensitive in all sense areas, in light, sound, temperature, texture, taste, touch. All these sense areas are hypersensitive. So we need to be aware of that. Is there refusal to eat this food? Is that a sensory issue, as opposed to just willful, stubborn behavior? Be as consistent in routines as possible. I often tell families, same bedtime every night. Don't have a different bedtime on weekdays, weekends, holidays, vacations. Same meal times every day as much as possible, because that helps get past damaged working memory into long-term memory. Then they know what to expect. And anytime there's going to be a change, you need to prepare them early and often. Limit the number of rules. One rule is best. These are the rules that I had for Bill, and I cringe at this. There is not one of these 7 rules that is appropriate. Not one of them. But remember, this was way before he got his diagnosis of FASD. I actually think that these rules aren't good for anybody. So again, don't have rules like that. The fewer rules, the better. Simple rules. Go over them. Go over what's that rule? What does that rule mean? How would you follow that rule? Then when they break the rule, you say, let's go over again. How can I help you remember that rule when you need it? One direction or one step at a time because of damage in working memory. And then check for true understanding, which again is not, do you understand? Do you have any questions? That's always going to be the answer. Don't do that. What does that mean? How would you do that? Let me show you how I would do that. Remember, modeling is the best. Let's do this together. So, Bill had the diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder, and I would give him these instructions. He wouldn't do them. But then when I realized what was going on, and I said, Bill, go to your room. I'll be right there. And I went to his room. I said, Bill, let's pick up your dirty clothes. And we did it together. If he was truly oppositional, he would have refused. He had no problem doing it. When I did it with him, and we broke it down to one thing at a time, he could be really successful. Prepare them for any change in their schedule, any change in people around them, because any change increases stress and anxiety and increases the likelihood that they're going to overreact. Keep conversations short and then review what you're talking about and what that means for them. Identify a point person. Anytime, this is the goal for me, for most people with FASD, as they get older. Anytime you're not sure about something, anytime you have a question, you call me. And if I'm not around, you call this person. So we have a point person and a backup. They may be family members. They may be good friends. They may be professionals. Depends on the individual. But they need to know anytime you're not sure about something. You need to learn to do this on your own and figure this out on your own. So there was a young woman who was in substance use treatment. She graduated from treatment. She got her an apartment. She went back for her outpatient appointment, and she told her therapist that she was having sex with the landlord because the landlord told her that if she didn't have sex with him, that she would get evicted. And she said, well, I wasn't sure, but I don't want to lose my apartment. And if we could build in, anytime you're not sure, you call me. And if I'm not around, you call this person. Both of us, you feel comfortable with us. And it's not a question of, you say to them, well, what do you think you should do? You think that's right? No, I don't think that's right. Okay, you don't have to call me about that again. You don't say that. There's no such thing as a stupid question or a stupid time. And they could ask the same question 50 times. That's okay. That's what we want to build in. That asking questions is a strength. It's not a weakness. Some people think it's a weakness. I don't think so. I think it's a strength. Again, I talked about modeling. Role play is great modeling. So as I said before, like role playing, how far you stand from somebody when you talk with them and what you share when you first meet with them. Lots and lots and lots of repetition and consistency to get it past damaged working memory into long-term memory. The other thing is we tell people a lot what you can't do. You can't curse at people. You can't hit people, but we don't tell them, but you can do this. Anytime you need to tell them you can't, you have to tell them, but you can. You have to give them the alternative. You can't curse at people, but when you're mad, this is what you can say. You can't hit people, but when you're frustrated, this is what you can do. So try to avoid starting a sentence with if or when, because any sentences starting with if or when is setting up a reward and consequence. And if there need to be consequences, they need to be immediate, short-term, and connected with what happened. Again, I talked about joking. Use more senses, don't use verbal. If you visuals, tactile, the more senses you use, the better. Money equals power and control in our society. So what we want to do is, they may need a little bit of money every day as they get older. Not here's your money for the week or the month, you have to learn to manage it. If it's somebody who runs away a lot, sometimes we have people, youth or adults, who take off and run away. Instead of just consequencing them for running away, let's talk about a safe place they can run to. Whenever they need to get away, here's where they can go. It may be to a neighbor, it may be to a friend, it may be in the backyard, it may be in a room in the house, but let's establish a place. Anytime you run, you need to feel you need to run, here's where you can go, so I know that you're safe, because they really worry about you. That's much better than just consequencing them for running away. For youth who are in school, separate home and school. Whatever happens in school needs to be dealt with by the school, not this kid misbehaved in school and they have to be consequenced at home, because then they begin to hate school and home. And I think it's so important to find time every day to have fun with the person and laugh. I can't stress that enough, even if it's 5 minutes or so. But find time, and this especially now with the coronavirus, find time to do something fun and be able to laugh with them and enjoy them, instead of always worrying about, oh my God, all these behaviors I have to deal with. Really important, and this is physiological. This is research that was started by Joanne Weinberg at the University of British Columbia that found that in FASD, there's an over-release of a substance called cortisol under minor stressful situations, which makes them overreact. So we need to help identify when they are beginning to get stressed, anxious, frustrated, or angry, because what happens is they go from 0 to 1,000 in about 30 seconds, but we have to catch them right before that 30 seconds. What was going on? What were the signs that they were beginning to lose it? And then come up with 2 things that help them calm down when they get upset. Practice them with them over and over again. And as they get a little bit older, talk with them about, what I see when you're starting to get upset is your face gets red. So how about if I give you a signal to go and take a chill out, which is do one of those 2 things that we practiced. And then ideally, it's getting them to the point to recognize when they need that chill out. And it's got to be immediate. It can't be in school waiting to get you called on or waiting till the end of the lesson. It can't be in a group setting where they have to wait until the end of group. It's got to be immediate, because we have to interrupt the over-release of cortisol. And that can reduce aggression, acting out, and getting thrown out. I talk about find something that they do and do well that's safe and legal, and make sure that they get to do that regardless of their behavior. Being fair rather than equal means we need to treat everybody as an individual. That's so important. Not everybody is not the same, so we can't have the same rules for everybody, because everybody's an individual. Many parents have found that teaching their individuals with FASD sign language has been really helpful, because sign language is visual, it's not auditory. And remember, verbal receptive language processing, which is taking words in, storing into the brain, recalling them when they need them, and know what to do, is impaired. So a little bit of sign language. I'll give you a sign for different things. And I talked about the chill out space. I'm going to skip some of these because I know I have to end, and I apologize. Again, in social media, don't take away their social media if they misuse it, because they will always find somebody else who has it who they can use it. Let's open up a dialogue. You know, not everybody who's on social media is honest in who they say they are. And it's really hard for any individual to figure that out. So anytime you get a message or somebody contacts you, let's talk about it and see, is this somebody who seems to be a safe person, or is it not? How do we let's figure that out together. And what they could share, like they shouldn't put pictures of themselves up, because somebody can take that picture and take their face, put it on another body, send it out to millions of people, or vice versa, take their body and put another face on it. So let's, talk about what to share and what not to share. But it's as much as you can keep the dialogue open and start that dialogue early, I think that's the best thing. In terms of sexuality, it's like, be very literal in sex education, and be clear on what they can do and what they can't do. A mother called me one day about her 14-year-old who was getting into trouble in school because he was masturbating in school. And I said, I think that one thing you could do is say to him, if you need to do this, you can do it when you're in your room by yourself with the door closed. And that's the only place that you can do that. Be very literal in that. what you can do, what you can't do. This is the only place you can do that. And I said, and if he likes masturbating for hours at a time, you may say, you know, for a half an hour, for 15 minutes, we'll set the timer. When you're in your room with the door closed by yourself, this is where you can do that, but nowhere else. You can't do it outside. You can't do it in school. You can't do it anywhere but here, because you can't just say, well, you can't do it in school because then they're at the bus stop and masturbating. Well, you didn't tell me at the bus stop. You told me in school. I wasn't in school. Or they were at the schoolyard. Well, I wasn't in school. So this is the only place you can do that. And in terms of suicide, we need to really address their basic needs and provide supports for them, and, you know, monitor risk really closely, and don't use a suicide contract that you expect that they won't commit suicide because they say that they won't. Anytime you feel this way, you talk with me. That's the most important thing. And then there are these things about sleep hygiene. So really what the experts in sleep hygiene are saying is that the bedroom should be just for sleep. It should be a quiet space, soft, dark at night. If they need a nightlight, that's fine. They shouldn't have media in their bedroom. They should actually stop using media about an hour before bedtime. No big meals before bedtime. Of course, no caffeine. Exercise early in the day, not later in the day, not at night. Be aware of things like tags in their pajamas or wrinkled sheets. And again, it may be a sensory issue. There are individuals with FASD who have done so much better with a therapy dog if they have trouble sleeping, with the dog sleeping on the bed with them and the dog's breath slowing down, help them slow down and get to sleep. And then talk about the possibility of medication with physicians, but melatonin only helps people get to sleep. It doesn't help people stay asleep. And because it's over the counter, people think it's safe, not necessarily so. Zero tolerance doesn't work. Kind of no eject programs work better. As they get older, we need to talk with them visually about who is helpful for them, who's a safe person and who's not. And this is an approach that's been used at the Parent-Child Assistance Program in Washington State that was developed there, where you draw a circle and you draw a fence and you talk about who are people who have been safe to you and who are people who have gotten you into trouble or you've gotten into trouble with. They go on the other side of the fence. And who are people you're not sure about and they go on the fence until we learn more about them. And I would say to somebody with FASD, nobody you meet for the first time ever gets in your circle of support, because they'll meet somebody at the bus stop, immediately they're their best friend. Nope, they all go on the fence until we learn about them. And once we learn more about them, I don't care if it's a new psychiatrist, they go on the fence until we learn more about them. Then we decide, are they safe? Do they go in your circle of support? Or did they go on the other side of the fence? We can use this also when we're talking about social media and getting these messages. Okay, let's look, where does this person go? Some people will have nobody in their circle of support. We have to get people in their circle of support. Some people will have people who have abused them or their drug dealer in their circle of support. We have to get them on the other side of the fence. And then teach them what to say to somebody who's on the other side of the fence when they come to see them or call them. And practice that over and over again and role play that, so that they know when somebody calls them, they can look at this because we've given them copies of it and know where the person fits. Oh, they're on the other side of the fence, I know what to do. Oh, they're in my circle of support, I know I can talk with them. And when they want to talk with somebody, they look and they can talk with somebody in their circle of support. It's been really helpful. I've shared it with other programs, mental health programs, not just with FASD. And the response I get is that people really like it because it's so visual. Art therapy, movement and dance. Again, animal-assisted therapy, really, really useful. So again, we want to change the environment, and our focus should be on changing the environment. We need to be creative. Everybody involved needs to understand FASD. It really helps improve outcomes for individuals and families. And our goal is, what does this person and family need in order to be successful, with what success is for them, and how do we help them achieve that? And remember that FASD is a human issue. The most important thing is to really care. Find out what do you like about this person? What makes you smile about them? Again, step back and do that. I've developed a strengths assessment because I felt that's so important to do strengths assessments, because that's the one area that we just kind of miss. We know that people with FASD have their family and their families have great potential, and we need reminders of that, because when things aren't going well, we forget it. So here's Bill at 14 years old, he's in the stocks. And here he is at 27 years old, he's still in the stocks. And some days it feels like nothing has changed. And that's when we need to take out this list of all those things that they do well. And wow, look at all this that you do, that you're able to do. That's really impressive. And look at what you've been able to do, and look at what you have accomplished. That's been great. I mean, being on a swim team for 5 years, that's great. Not, oh, he quit after 5 years, but being on that team and being able to improve his times pretty regularly. That was great. And getting into the championships one year. Super. Look at what you've been able to accomplish. And remember that recognizing and correctly addressing FASD is literally a matter of life or death. So what we all do with this together can save people's lives. So I really appreciate your being at the symposium and listening to me this afternoon. And I hope this has been helpful to you, and I look forward to your questions. So thank you very much.